Yep,
Yeah.
see the red. Okay, go ahead. Okay. Today is April
13th.
April 13th, 2016. We're in St. Cloud, Minnesota, at Luke Tripp's home. Okay.
And we're having a conversation. I'm Professor Charles Simmons from the Hush House in Detroit, and myself and brother Dr. Luke, we go back many, many years. We've been friends and comrades since around 1963. We were in a youth organization in Detroit called UHURU, and later the League of Revolutionary Black Workers. And at this moment, we've attended a conference. I spoke at the university that he's teaching at, St. Cloud University, and that was yesterday, and today at University of Minnesota in Minneapolis, about human rights and the global environmental issues. We talked about also our visit to Cuba in 1964, which was a historic trip of 4 African Americans from Detroit, who went from Detroit to Philadelphia to Chicago, to Philadelphia, to Paris, to Prague, Czechoslovakia, to Ireland, to Newfoundland, to Havana, in such a circle because of the blockade against Cuba that was set up in 1960. And we're discussing this as a part of the human rights abuses that the U.S. has implemented against Cuba. And we also talked about some of the great achievements of Cuba, particularly in education and healthcare, and the fact that youth were among the major leaders in the country. We met with important leaders in Cuba, from the Cuban government, and also many other international leaders who were present at the time. So, Luke, what were your thoughts on that trip?
I think that was a momentous trip in terms of my life. As you know, we were both members and founders of UHURU, which is a Black student group at Wayne State University. And we really, at that point, I think we were probably the most militant and radical Black student group in the state. Maybe one of the most radical and militant groups in the nation. And we were firmly committed to direct action. Well, first, I think we were sort of looking for maybe the adults and others to take some action, for instance, like the NAACP, some youth clubs. But since no other organization was taking the kind of action we thought was needed, we formed our own. And some of the direct action we engaged in we boycotted supermarkets. Supermarkets were in our neighborhoods, but they were not hiring Black folks. They had branch banks in our neighborhoods. We could deposit our money, but they wouldn't hire Black people as bank tellers.
They'll give us loans.
Those kinds of. And so it was, and also there were police brutality was blatant. And so these are sort of issues we addressed, and we attempted. And at that time in 1963, the Mayor Kavanaugh attempted to made a bid for the city of Detroit to host the Olympics, which was scheduled to be held in 1968. So we had sit-ins and went to the mayor's office and listed a set of demands. At that point, the public schools were deteriorating. As the public schools became blacker, they became more dilapidated and impoverished. Right? So that was an issue we wanted to bring to the mayor. And also, we were both attending Wayne State University, which is one of the three of the largest research universities in the state of Michigan. And it's a large urban community university, and most of the students commuted to or commuters like ourselves. So we weren't students who had lived in dorms on campus. When we attend classes, we go back to our community. We had that very close ties. We caught buses to the campus and go to school and all. So we knew what was going on in our communities. That's why much of our action were not on campus. They were off campus in our communities, right? So that's one of the points about where our action took place.
And the city of Detroit had the city council had voted to uphold basically segregated housing. Remember?
That's right. That was another issue. Then segregation was so rampant, even in Central City, where the university was located. Black folks could not even rent apartments right on campus.
Right.
So Detroit in the 1960s was just like Johannesburg, South Africa.
Right.
So we were angry, we were militant, we were engaged, and at that time at Wayne State, just like other universities, there was no black studies or courses taught. There were no Chicano studies taught. There were no studies that dealt with American Indians, all of that. If we took a course in sociology, they would have topics like the Negro problem, right? So this gives you an idea.
And I don't
about
remember any black faculty. I was told that there was somebody who was teaching.
Right, there were a few, because I had, I think I remember they had, I had a few.
Yeah.
I had an English black instructor, I think Professor Butler, and all
Okay.
that. But it was only a handful, just a very, very few, not typical. And most of the faculty members I know were racist to the bone.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have to attend that. So when you're in a class, you go to the neighborhood, the climate, the police brutality. All of these were had this feeling of living in an apartheid state. Okay, and then at the same time, we had to, we in UHURU had to educate ourselves. We began to go to forums. We started reading pamphlets. We read Robert Williams, who was taking a militant stand. He had a newsletter. We began to read that.
The Crusader, Negroes of God.
Yeah. So we had to educate ourselves, and the more highly educated we became, the angrier we became, and the more we became committed to the struggle for human rights and for social justice.
And we were also reading the literature about worldwide revolutions. I mean, the revolution in China, the revolution in Russia, the Cuban Revolution, and we were reading about what was happening in the African independence movement with Kwame Nkrumah, and what had happened with the Algerian Revolution, and what was happening in the Congo. We had demonstrations, in fact, about the U.S. being in the Congo, and because they said that the Congolese had killed some white missionaries. Remember that?
Yes.
We had a protest downtown, and we said that the U.S. we said the people were in the CIA. We didn't have any facts, but we said they're probably CIA agents, and then it turned out that they were.
Yeah, that's right. And then of course we were demonstrating against the Vietnam War, even when it was unpopular.
Right.
And as you mentioned, in 1963, the prelude to the big March on Washington that happened in Detroit. Where there were hundreds of thousands. And then, of course, some of the those who were principally involved in organizing the Detroit March, they went the youth contingent, so they went to UHURU. We were supposed to, sort of mobilize many of the students. Then we got into a conflict, because they said that they didn't want any militant signs out there.
Oh yeah.
And then they said, no, you guys look like a hate group. So we wrote a big poster saying hate group.
I remember I had a sign that said Negroes with guns will overcome.
Right, and all that. So one of the points is the background, so you get some understanding why 4 of our members, including myself, Charles Johnson, General Baker, and Charles Simmons and myself were ready to basically go to Cuba. We know about the ban about the travel to Cuba and other places, North Korea, Benya, and all that. So U.S. government said no, you can't go there. China,
Yeah.
and for us, that was that was a white master trying to tell slaves what they can do and not do, right? And all that gave us more reason to go, right, to check it out. And we were inspired by the revolution, the Cuban Revolution, Che Guevara, Fidel Castro, and all of that. And so we had, as you described, we had to go all the way to Czechoslovakia to get a Cuban plane to fly to Cuba, right, in a roundabout way.
Yeah, since we believed that the FBI was going to block the trip, and so we had to go all the way around the world. Because they didn't know when and how we were going, so that we were playing cat and mouse. And this was all in 1964.
Okay. And then you mentioned my impression.
But let's get back to the UHURU event, because UHURU, that's a very important historical. Some of the other things we did, there was a Cynthia Scott demonstration against police brutality. The Detroit police had shot a black woman whose name was Cynthia Scott, and they said that she was attacking this police officer, and it turned out that he shot her. She had stabbed him, they say, and he shot her in the back. I mean, it was very a lot of cover-up and very scandalous. But we organized a major demonstration along with GOLD, Group on Advanced Leadership. The two of us worked together quite a bit. And we had a major demonstration at the police department at 1300 Bobian Police Headquarters at the time. The largest demonstration of its type that we had known about in Detroit. So people came from everywhere. I mean, it was packed downtown. We also had a demonstration about the Olympics. And some of our people got arrested and had to stand trial for disturbing the peace during a public rally, something like that.
Absolutely. And true to form, going back to the Cynthia Scott case, they tried to assassinate her character by describing, she was nothing but a prostitute.
Right.
So you see that, a black man gets shot, and then he was nothing but a thug anyway.
Right.
And all that. So you see that demonization, of the victims of police violence, and it continues, and so it just continues, from the past, nothing new. And going back to the demonstration, as I said before, when we had the demonstration in Mayor Kavanaugh's office, he didn't show up, but we left the demands there anyway. And Mayor Kavanaugh was trying to sell the bid for the Olympics and say, the Olympics will bring, it's a project for economic development, right? And say, it's going to create jobs, it's going to basically raise the stature of the city of Detroit, because it will achieve world-class status and all these other things. So we said, okay, Mr. Mayor, we go point by point and address everything that you said was a benefit. Okay. First of all, you said that essentially that if Detroit hosts the Olympics, it will create a lot of jobs. We got a question for you, Mayor. Jobs for whom, right? If you're going to do construction, you need carpenters, you need plumbers, you need electricians and all that. And look, Mr. Mayor, do you know that all those skilled craft things are kind of blocked for black people? It's easier to become an electrical engineer than to become the electricians, because we're locked out of those trades. So all those skilled trades and all that will open up, that's open up just for white only. So we're not talking about black jobs here. Now, Mr. Mayor, you said that basically we talking about construction. We pointed out that the schools are becoming more and more dilapidated. We call for some resources and attention to the schools. Now you told us Detroit doesn't have the money to do that. Well, it seems that you could find the money to build some structures, or like stadiums and all, for on the Olympics, but you can't do it for the schools, right? And then we said, now if you're going to host the Olympics, you're going to have athletes coming from all parts of the world, including the black world. Now, Detroit is the most racially residential segregated city in Detroit, right? So what are we going to do for all these dark Olympians coming to the city, right? And we asked you to do something about segregation right here in the city of Detroit. You haven't addressed that. So all those things you said that was all positive. When we put it to the race test, it fails every one. Right? And we want you to address that. Okay, so that was some of the things we addressed it. And as you said before, there was the mayor had a noonday rally. This is in the city of Detroit at noontime. All right. Now we're members of the UHURU. Well, we're students at St. Cloud. We are students at Wayne State University. All right. So what did we do? We made some homemade placards and all, and we were up there opposing the bid for the Olympics and trying to get the mayor's attention. And so what happened is that as the mayor made his speeches, many of the spectators who were there to support him said, "Yay!" And we did just the opposite. We said boo.
And there were the journalists from all over the world were out there because the Olympics issue.
Yeah, that's right.
So it was getting much media attention.
And so after about an hour or so, we got a little placards and went back to the campus because some of us had afternoon classes. Right? So we're back there on campus. It's as though the mayor said to the police chief, "Hey, go get them." So evidently, what happened is that the detective police went down to the administration of Wayne State University, got our class schedules, right? And then one, for instance, John Watson, he was sitting in this class and the police ran up there, just nabbed him, put him in handcuffs.
At the demonstration.
That's right.
They got me mixed up with John Watson.
Right.
But you know, before that though, the mayor he demanded that we make a public apology for disrupting the rally. Remember that?
Right.
And so I think the other black organizations apologized. UHURU refused to apologize.
Right.
You would say, I remember you saying that we refused to apologize, and they needed to apologize to us for 400 years of oppression. Then the following Monday, that was on Friday, I think. The following Monday, the police came into the classrooms and snatched people out of class at Wayne State.
And then we went to Milton Henry in the clay, right? Because Milton Henry advised us to go down to the police station. So we went down there and they arrested us, right, and all that. And then on our cognizance that we got out and so Milton Henry demanded a jury trial.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So we were up there. So see, the idea here is that they had some little trumped up charge about disturbing the peace at a public rally and all that. But maybe the prosecutor's office knew that they had a weak case, but say we're gonna make you pay, right? So if you are charged and you have to come to appear at court and all that, boom, there goes the semester, right? We're gonna hurt you. You got a job there,
you
boom, you're gonna get fired from your job. So we're gonna make you pay one way or the other. So what happened is that we were put on trial. It was the four of us. I mean, General Baker, John Williams, myself,
John Watson,
and John Watson,
and
Gwen Kemp. So the five of us, we're there. As I said before, in 1963, I mean
64.
No, this is 63.
Oh, okay,
right?
that's right.
Because I remember that guy said, I'm gonna be in Cuba later for on a trial. Okay, so what happened is this: all white jury, racist to the bone. How do I know? Well, I'm up there in the defendants, just like John Baker and all the rest, and we can see these the white folks up there, and they send us some very negative vibes, right, and all that. So what happened is this: we were going through the trial, and then there was a mistrial, right, in the end. So they had to do it again. Okay. So on the second trial, same thing. all white household jury and all. And the so the case went to the jury, and they came back out. We had a verdict, right? They asked the foreman, "What is your verdict?" And they said, "Not guilty." So we're a little surprised with that, given that. But I think what it became such a farce, in that I think these white jurors didn't want, since the charge was so outrageous of the prosecutor, they wanted to avoid embarrassment, to go on record, right? That I went for that. So it was, if they had anything that they could hang on, yes, right. So it was that, and they say, well, we're not going to be the prosecutor's pawn, because it's just too obvious, and it makes us look ridiculous.
Yeah,
right?
and I remember they said that Gwen Kemp, who was a very petite young lady, that she had pushed somebody, that she had pushed a white man, and that she was standing behind him. And I remember Melton Henry asked, "Well, do you have eyes in the back of your head? How do you know? How do you know who pushed you?" And she had a baby in her arms,
Right.
And then Melton Henry went out during the break. He went out and got somebody off the street and had him change clothes with John Williams. And the police came and identified John Williams, the person, the stranger, as John. So there was a lot of drama.
All right. So those were, and then plus, as I said before, our whole orientation was much beyond the civil rights thing. Because we were really radical and militant and all that. And so
we had a consciousness about, we were
right.
talking about making fundamental change, calling for revolution in the United States.
That's right.
Yeah,
and because we were very critical of Martin Luther King and that whole crowd and that. So what happened? So that was some of the highlights of UHURU, and we actually there was some blacks, for instance, in the city of Ann Arbor that was trying to do there, and then we went there and helped their group.
Right,
back
there, wasn't it? Detroit, what was that?
I forgot, with Thomas. Direct Action Committee or something like that.
Direct Action Committee,
DAC and all that. So we were going to, the point is, we were going outside the city of Detroit.
And we had also worked helping to organize the Freedom Now Party.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right. And that was another effort, because we go down to Dibs Hall, the Social Workers Party, and then the Bogs. That's what we kind of missed, the Bogs, because they were involved, and Clegg was involved in the Freedom Now Party, right? And so we had this third party effort to mobilize and those folks. So those were that point is that we were hooked into all of these radical radical currents, more in these radical currents than in these civil rights currents, right? Rather than integration let us in. No, we were anti-capitalist at that point, anti-imperialist at that point. And we were against the U.S. government. We saw the U.S. government as our enemy, and all that. So that was basically our orientation when we went to.
And that was why we got invited to go to Cuba, because another group had been the previous year that was organized by Progressive Labor in New York, and they said it was going to be a secret trip. Their concern was challenging the State Department travel ban. That wasn't our. I wanted to see about racism in Cuba. I wanted to see what the content of the revolution, and to meet people, Robert Williams and Mabel Williams and others.
That's a lot of the same. And all that. So they find someone to see, basically experience firsthand, like a revolutionary society.
Right.
And I remember going to some of the in Cuba, going to the revolutionary rallies that they had in the stadiums, and young people. There was so much energy in that stadium, and Cuba C, Yankee Note. And so inspiring, and how the revolution have captured, especially the spirit of the youth. Right. And so that was very impressive. And the other thing is that what they were doing with the youth. Remember, we went to these complexes where the educational complexes, where they had the youth.
Was this the one in the mountains?
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
that's one training.
Mhm.
Maybe I'm thinking about my other trip when I went there in '64. I went there again in '84. But what they were doing was there was a strong emphasis on education.
Mhm.
Right, so we're going to put these students in uniforms. We're going to that, and then also in terms of in health. And what they did is that they had these. It was very well organized. You had the school, you had medical staff right there in the schools, the nurses, in other words, it was almost like block organization, right? In terms of how everything was integrated at a community level.
Right.
And all the services were integrated, at that, neighborhood level and all that. So it's those organizational structures that made Cuba provided the strength for Cuba to keep functioning despite the embargo, despite all efforts to undermine what they had, because they did a lot of grassroots organizing and using the sources.
So in '64, I remember going up. We went up into the mountains looking at one of the schools, and the student, I think it was a middle school, and they asked us, talk about the United States. And we gave them a historical analysis of the racism in the United States, and the kids said, therefore you need to make a revolution in the United States and we will come and help you. They were like 13, 14 years old. Then they challenged us, they asked, are you going to climb the mountain? It was a mountain nearby.
Mm-hmm.
And me and General said, yeah, we're going to climb the mountain tomorrow morning. How did you know something? And man, we walked. And we got, I don't know how high we were, but, the goats were turning around and coming back. Vultures were looking at us and stuff, So eventually we just we got on the truck that the rest of the group was on.
Mm.
But their idea of climbing the mountains was a metaphor for achievement. And that is what they did for graduation. Also from the medical schools, that doctors would climb a mountain for graduation. And it was very significant because after the revolution, they lost most of the doctors. There was white flight to Miami, and so they had to start from scratch, building a medical system all over again, medical personnel. But over the years, they became the best of medical system with emphasis on preventative medicine throughout the countries of the global South, Africa and Asia and South America. They had the lowest birth rate, child mortality rate.
Right.
One of the lowest, certainly in the third world countries, and even better than the United States. And the life expectancy is higher than it is in the United States. And they send doctors everywhere, all over the world, to the most remote places. They were going to come to the United States, to New Orleans during the Hurricane Katrina. And then there were 1,500 of them sitting in the airport with their bags packed, ready to come to the United States, and President Bush refused to let them come. He said they were communists. We couldn't have, communist medicine.
Right. One of the event that I recall very vividly while in Cuba is that, as you mentioned before, Cuba invited many of the revolutionary fighters in groups all over the globe that were fighting against imperialism and communism. And I remember we went to this big assembly, and at that assembly, the North Vietnamese were being honored there. And see, the U.S. government should have had me an advisor, so I would have saved them a lot of costs in money and lives, right? Because the Vietnam War did not end until the 1970s. We were over there in 1964, right? And I remember we met the Vietnamese fighters, okay?
Yes.
And I looked in the faces of the Vietnamese. I didn't understand the Vietnamese language, but I could read their eyes and all that. And when I read their eyes, what I read was that there's no force on this planet that can defeat us. You can destroy us with nuclear weapons, that's possible. but you are not going to defeat us in our homeland, fighting your war. We will figure out a different kind of strategy. Yeah, we're gonna have our own tactics. If we don't have a powerful Air Force,
Right.
modern weapons and all that,
No Navy.
right, maybe, right, but we gonna figure out, use our own intelligence and strategies and defeat you.
And they had already defeated the French and the Japanese.
That's right.
Yeah.
So the point here is that I would have said, look, State Department, look, you're not gonna win. You might as well give it up. No, but what you have to do that. So I could have informed them right now. I said, I read the eyes of the Vietnamese. Give it up. Go home. Pack up. Right. So that was actually seen these revolutionary fighters.
And that was the white supremacy foreign policy of the United States and the colonial policy of the United States that was determined to try to put these people in line and make them submit to this colonial power after they had already defeated French colonialism and Japanese colonialism. And it turned out that Ho Chi Minh was right. They could not defeat them in their homeland. Now the Vietnamese were not bothering anybody else. You know, they were at home, organized in their own country. And so we went all the way across the planet to fight them. Violation of human rights, international law, everything.
And you mentioned many of these very wealthy white Cubans who went to Florida.
Yes.
And what the U.S. Cuban government did, all those big mansions, they converted those into community centers,
Right.
And transformed those. And then, of course, the hotels and all. And I also remember they had the militia. You know, you saw many of them, and we said, and people say, well, you still have the militia out here? And they say, well, you see all these things that were part of the people. Those gusanos will never get it back. Okay, I mean, you can try to pull a Bay of Pigs again,
Right.
and you're going to be defeated again, right?
Right.
And all that. So here you have all the resources that was built by the people, that was in all those resources were captured by the wealthy. Then they redistributed that wealth that their labor power had already built and distributed to the people. So many of those, I remember many of those big mansions were converted to child centers,
Right.
And
Right.
Other museums and all.
Right.
So that was the idea
Dormitories.
about these resources belong to the people.
Right.
We've been ripped off by this wealthy class and all that. And so we saw that, that sort of conversion, right before.
Right. And then, we're referring to them as white Cubans, but they're really, technically it's basically fair-skinned Cubans who, because if you look at their families, many of them have black people in their families somewhere, you see, because the mixture. But they identified as white. That's the main thing, I guess, politically.
That's right, because the dictator that was Batista, who was overthrown by the Cuban Revolution, he was part black heritage, and that
Right.
was so that was sort of a typical look white and all that. But as
Right.
you said before, it was that's the issue, and of course with some of the remnants of racism, that's why it's still a sticky thing in Cuba today, right? And all of that about the complexity in that culture and the meaning of whiteness,
Right.
and all that. But the meaning of whiteness was very clear when he got to Florida.
Yes,
yeah,
They
and all that.
became
And
white,
then, right,
definitely.
and then that really heightened their consciousness about that, because some who could pass for white. They had other darker friends and family and all that.
Relatives.
And then you got over to Florida and began to do the adjustment, and then you see a greater kind of sorting, but didn't have it. It wasn't that kind of obvious to that degree. In Cuba.
Now, I thought the revolutionary government fought hard at the beginning of the revolution to wipe out, they did eliminate segregation legally. But I don't think they realized the depth of racism and the effect of this global character and how deep that was, that you can't just fight for a few years and that'll go away. Because the U.S. had occupied Cuba in the early ever since the Spanish-American-Cuban War for about 20 years. And that was a Klan type occupation. you know, the U.S. Army was segregated itself. So white Americans were occupying Cuba, and with a very colonial mentality, and perpetuated and ingrained deeply those attitudes about superiority. And so black people were marginalized and segregated and generally discriminated against in Cuba. And I remember we used to refer to, this was back in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, we referred to Cuba as the Mississippi of Latin America, and that was prior to the Cuban Revolution.
That's right.
But we still have some difference in the leadership. When you look at the picture of the leadership, you generally see people who are very fair-skinned, and so the upward mobility has been blocked economically because of the blockade, but also because the people in Miami are sending back, you know, millions of dollars to their relatives who are people who are fair-skinned, and so the black Cubans are not getting the same type of money. So that has created some income inequality. So that struggle continues, although they have made tremendous gains in terms of education and healthcare.
Right. And then I want to go back to Cuba's relations to Africa.
Okay.
To the African
Yes.
liberation.
Very
Let me to underscore the relationship. When Nelson Mandela was released from prison in South Africa, the first head of state that he visited was Fidel Castro.
Yes.
You said that was a link. What did that mean? Well, the apartheid regime in South Africa basically had invaded Angola, you know, Namibia, and all that, and they were pushing more towards Angola. And they would have been pushed. And the only military force that pushed back that the South African army was the Cuban army. Fidel Castro sent those Cuban troops and pushed them out of Angola.
They fought side by side with the African soldiers.
That's right. Yeah. So and that's the role. So the point here is that Cuba played an active military role to fight against apartheid.
Right.
At the same time, the U.S. and the West doing everything they can to prop up the apartheid regime,
right,
and all that. So, and of course, when we were in Cuba, we saw African delegations, right, in building the relationship, and all the Africans students, you know, in Africa. So Cuba had that's the kind of links that they had with the liberation struggle, black liberation struggle. So now you know why Nelson Mandela said, I'm gonna visit Fidel, right, and honoring that kind of relationship.
And so the independence of Namibia, because that used to be Southwest Africa when it was occupied by the apartheid government, it was speeded up by the presence of the Cuban troops, as well as the independence of Angola and the independence of the Union of South Africa. Right. So I mean, and it contributed to the struggles in Guinea-Bissau and Mozambique, you know, and Zimbabwe, all those. So it played a major role for a country that size to have such a major impact on world history. But they were determined to support, and that's what they called being comrades, was actually giving their blood, and nobody else came to help Africans as the Cubans did. So we talked about healthcare and education. The role of youth was extremely important.
That's right.
I mean, everywhere we went, you saw young people in leadership positions. Now, even Fidel and Che, they were still in their 30s. Yeah. At the time that they were head of the government. But many of the African leaders, as you pointed out, sent their students to Cuba for training, and Asians, and we met people throughout South America who were in Cuba for training and support.
Right. And then they point out the relationship between Cuba and black American liberation fighters. I mean, why was Robert Williams in Cuba?
Right.
Cuban support.
Right.
Why did some of the Panthers go to Cuba? Cuban support.
Right.
Why is there a political prisoner right now that the U.S. is trying to grab back?
Assata.
It's in Cuba.
Right.
So Cuba has provided a haven for people, for black folks who fought against racism, who fought against the injustice.
Yeah, Fidel Castro had said that because he was always running from the police, that anybody who was a political prisoner from the United States, they would always have a home in Cuba.
That's right. And remember when Fidel himself went to the U.S. to the UN, he stayed at the Hotel Teresa, a black hotel in Harlem. He said, yeah, that's where he felt
and was there with Malcolm X.
Right.
That was what I saw that inspired me about Cuba originally. So, guess we move on to talk about the environmental. I don't know how your time is, but the environmental issues of today. We began with the issues in Flint and Detroit. Our conclusion was that the struggle of the poisoning of the people's water in Flint and the shutoff of the water in Detroit are basically political issues. They were decisions based on white supremacy and capitalist greed. It's not really a technical or scientific decision because everybody knew that the water that they switched to was poison. I mean, you could just look at the water and see that it was just a sewer. I mean, the color, the smell, everything. But they would rather do that than to be connected with the Detroit system. And many of the white communities actually wanted to break away from the Detroit system once Coleman Young was the mayor. And they had been talking about that for a long time. But then they lied about the water being safe. And while they were lying and saying the water was safe, they were ordering and drinking bottled water. The mayor, the governor, and all of the people, they were drinking bottled water and telling us that the water was safe. And our kids got, even before the lead poisoning was discovered, people were getting sick, and they were complaining about being sick for some time. So this was a criminal act on the part of the governor and the various henchmen and women under him. But Flint and Detroit are being duplicated. I mean, the poison water and the poison air, the poison food are problems that we're facing throughout the United States and globally. And there is a movement to privatize water systems all over the world and have corporations take them over, raise prices, and so on. So the people in Flint had the highest water bills in the United States, probably. They were paying over $120 a month for rent, for water, and still are paying high water bills in spite of having this totally unhealthy system. And it would take, they're talking about spending some millions of dollars on cleaning up the systems in their houses. This is something that has damaged the entire sewer system, and so we need to really talk about overall removal of those pipes underground and putting new pipes in. We're talking about $1 billion operation throughout the city. And this would not have been done in a wealthy white community.
Right.
See?
And that just underscores the very nature of the government, which I would describe as a white racist oligarchy. And it's becoming more and more naked. As sort of illustrated by the political moves made in cities where there are large black populations.
Right.
And in each one of those cities with large black populations, the political strategy was to install emergency managers, strip them. So we're not even going to pretend that any kind of elected officials are running the show, any kind of a facade of a democracy. We're going to strip it. And once we strip it, put these these emergency managers in place, then we're going to have the political wherewithal to transform and reduce the public sector to the private sector. So in public schools, they're going to become charter schools.
Right.
In terms of the public sector that's organized, teachers and unionized thing, we're gonna break that union.
Bust the
We're gonna
unions
bust the union.
and
So all of these
take
things.
back the
Yeah,
pensions.
right. That's right. And then we're gonna deprive resources. That's why there are demonstrations in the city of Detroit about resources, about the dilapidated schools, all the things we were protesting back in the '60s,
Right.
and all that. So we're gonna so there's gonna be less resources. In the racial aspect, it has to do with, as again, those emergency of managers coming in and playing on the theme that black administrators are incompetent,
Right.
and they need basically white administrators appointed by that. So the racial character was the racial population of this little political entity or this unit, and how basically we use the black administrators and elected officials as our scapegoats, right? And
Right.
because we got that kind of stereotype going and use that against them, and and in some cities like Flint, there's a significant white population. They become collateral damage.
Collateral damage is a term we use in military and warfare.
Right.
When they bomb a target and all the other people around that target that get killed, they call that collateral damage. Like, oops, we're sorry.
Right.
You see, but piggybacking on that, what you're saying about the finance, the people in the city of Detroit, for example, had voted every time a millage came up to say we need to spend more money on schools. We always voted to put more money in the school systems, and the state of Michigan, the governor's office, would always steal our money. And so they had taken millions of dollars from our budget, and so now we're broke. The money's gone. I mean, and so they allowed their henchmen and these various corporations to steal the money from the school systems, and they bled it dry. And they also cut back the revenue sharing that existed in the state. You know, you get federal money that's supposed to be divided up between the various cities. So they stopped giving Detroit the money that they were supposed to be giving, and the other black communities. And this new system of emergency managers was a total dictatorship. I mean, it didn't exist in any other state, and we had voted against it. We voted against emergency managers on all levels, and still the government implemented this. I mean, they came up with all kind of tricks and implemented it anyway. And that meant that the local government, the city council, the mayor, the school board, they could all be overruled based on the decision of this one individual who was representing the governor, an unelected person. And so I was saying today that all the countries where the United States is fighting and supposed to be spreading democracy throughout the Middle East and North Africa, I mean Afghanistan, Iraq, a list is too long to name. They have more democracy in those places than we do in Detroit and Southeast Michigan dealing with these emergency managers. Also, I wanted to point out that we need to make a fundamental change in our U.S. foreign policy dealing with the idea that we have to have military force to solve problems between countries, and that we're spending $1 trillion a year on militarism that we need to be spending in our cities, in our schools and our housing, and try to correct the theft that's been done by these banks. And also, the militarism does not solve any problems. It creates problems of hatred and long-term the desire for revenge, and so people are willing to blow us up, anywhere, anytime, because we have been stealing their land, stealing their resources over 100 years, and Britain and France and them have been doing it for about 300 or 400 years. So this is why the people are so angry at the United States in the first place. So we have to correct this. We've got to demonstrate that we are a neighbor, that we are acting in the global community as a good neighbor, trying to help people rather than trying to destroy governments that we don't like and rip them off, basically being gangsters. So we have to change our gangster policy and then put emphasis upon diplomacy. Then we won't need a big military. I mean, most of the governments in the world don't have giant armies in the air forces and navies. I mean, they spend their money on education and healthcare. Costa Rica in Central America has no military whatsoever. We need to learn from the little countries where they have peace and see how they do this, instead of us being the bully going around telling everybody else what to do, how to live, when we are having such major problems of disruption and chaos in our own cities and rural communities.
And you know, you're taking some concrete steps to address all of those issues: environmental issues, sustainable issues. And you and your wife have established an institute, and you have some sort of some programs to try to help educate and trying to bring other students as a learning institute, so that we can really build healthy societies.
Yes.
Yeah. What are some of those programs?
Okay, we have, first of all, we have on the cultural
This
front,
is the Hush House.
The Hush House, Black Community Museum and Leadership Training Institute for Human Rights, was established by my wife and I about 10 years ago. My wife is Professor Reverend Sandra Simmons, and she's the director of the Hush House. And we also have the Simmons Center for Peace and Justice Studies. So we are bringing a high level of education to people in the community, and that is going to be done online as well as at our site in Detroit. So we're working with universities to bring students to be interns or to take classes and do field trips and study what is happening in Detroit and how we have a vision for building a new type of city, a new type of America with new work and new human relationships. We're talking about buildings, cooperatives, as opposed to building other capitalist organizations to rip people off. We're building communities of compassion, and we're building an environmental model for construction and renovation of existing properties in our facilities, and we're inviting young people to come and work with us with a hands-on project to build something new that works for, you know, creating new types of jobs where everybody is a participant and everybody benefits.
It sounds good, brother.
Well, thank you.
You've been in the struggle for over a half a century.
That's right.
And you keep on keeping on.
And you too.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, you said you want